Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today with Aube Lescure joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome, Aube. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Becky. I've been a follower of LitMac News for a long time,
Oh,
so very excited to be
wonderful.
part of the show.
Glad to hear it. And I should say, your magazine, you are the editor at Off Assignment. So why don't we start? Everyone go, any questions, type them into the chat and I'll work them into the conversation. And why don't we start with you taking us through the history of the magazine, when it was created, why it was created, and when you came on board?
Yes, absolutely. So, Off Assignment is an online literary magazine that publishes creative nonfiction. So, we publish uh, basically only personal essays across a variety of prompt-based columns that are mostly centered around place, journeys, personal journeys. So it's not quite a travel magazine, although a lot of our pieces, because they're focused on place, do have a travel element. And the way it all got started was when, back in, I think it was 2016, our co-founder, Colleen Kinder, she's really the visionary behind the magazine. She was teaching a writing class at Yale University. I think it was a travel writing class, and she invited the legendary travel writer Pico Iyer to come to the class and give a talk. And she asked him a question about this famous piece he wrote about Iceland to, ask him about the process behind writing it. And then he went off on a tangent,
Hmm.
talking not so much about the piece and the assignment, but the night he spent walking around the streets of Reykjavik with this stranger, this Icelandic woman he met on the trip, and how much that night of walking was still so radioactive in his memory. And that got Colleen thinking about all the stories, the personal stories that happen while you're on assignment,
Hmm.
reporting for something that don't in the end fit into the confines of the printed column or the eventual published piece, but are still in some ways for some writers, the most interesting part of the experience are kind of the personal happenings behind the reporting. And that's how she came up with a concept of off assignment, so personal stories that happened while you were on assignment and creating the space. Initially, it was mostly for reporters, travel writers, journalists to almost have this after hour salon where you share stories of what happened to you when you were on assignment, when you were doing these reporting trips. And she sent out an email to basically her whole network of writers with this prompt, um, letter to a stranger. So this is our flagship column and one of our five or six prompts, and it's kind of the OG one, is write an essay that's addressed to a stranger who still haunts you.
Hmm.
And she invited writers to send her essays, and people really, really responded. And that's also when Colleen and Off Assignment discovered the power of a prompt. That's why all of our columns are prompt-based. They're not just, general fiction or general nonfiction. They're really an invitation trying to unlock or generate something for the writer. So a lot of writer responded. Pico Iyer ended up writing about
Cool.
that night and the stranger in Iceland. That was one of the original flagship pieces for the magazine. Leslie Jameson, Lauren Groff, so many writers wrote for that initial cachet of letters. And then the magazine kind of grew from there.
Hmm.
So that was in 2016. I actually came on board in 2020. And at the time, the magazine had developed a few other columns besides Letter to a Stranger that are also really fun. So there's Under the Influence, which is about the alchemy between art and place. So it
Hmm.
could be someone, you know, listening to a particular musician or reading a particular book or visiting a place with a particular movie in mind, but it's kind of the alchemy or juxtaposition between art and place. And then another column is no equivalent, which
Mm.
is about a phrase or word that resists translation.
Mm.
Um, and then, from then we have more columns. I can go into them later, but you can see how all the columns, it's hard to categorize. It's kind of a contrarian spirit about something that's left untold or resists telling, but the prompt is kind of trying to coax a story out of
Mm.
the writer. And so off assignment is a place for essays like these, which is, as an editor, challenging in some ways because people really have to write for us
Mm.
or adapt their pieces for something that fit us. It's not like we just accept like any kind of interview or short story or personal essay. But at the same time, that allows us to be this place for kind of highly curated, mysterious place or
Mm.
travel adjacent pieces. And for me, what I always say is the most important thing for me is ultimately literary quality. We are
Mm.
not, a travel magazine. This is not a place where people can, pitch us um, travelogues or listicles. Like we care first and foremost about the quality of these pieces as
Mhm.
literary essays.
Yeah, that's great. So to clarify, do you have the columns and then like a general submissions section that is in response to a particular prompt, or are the columns the sort of main features of the magazine?
The columns are the main features of the magazine. So we publish across, I think right now it's 5 or 6 columns. So there's Letter to a Stranger, No Equivalent, Under the Influence, the three I just talked about. We also recently started a more short form column called Witching Hour,
Mhm.
which are shorter essays that are focused on place portraiture of a particular place at a particular time. And these are a lot shorter and illustrated. And then we are currently exploring a few new columns. One that we're launching this summer is called Goodbye to That Place.
Mm.
And it's a riff on Didion's Goodbye to All That, except it can be about, any place, and it's a farewell narrative essay. But to answer your question, in our submission guidelines, what people send us has to
I see.
match one of these columns. We don't have like a kind of more general pool
Hmm.
of essays.
And because it's so specific, I'm wondering, do you have enough submissions or are you just surprised to see, are you overwhelmed with submissions?
That is such a great and pertinent question. So we do have a regular kind of submittable open submission process, and it's free. We do get a steady volume of submissions. It's it's not as overwhelming, I would say, as other magazines who have just kind of general general fiction and nonfiction open. But our model is, we will read and discuss and vote on every submission that comes through Submittable. Not necessarily discuss every piece, but certainly the ones that make it further down the process. And I would say about 60% of the pieces we publish do end up coming from Submittable, and maybe 40% are our editors, myself included, soliciting writers, or even more recently, with some columns, we started experimenting with commissioning. Although that's, we're a small nonprofit lit mag, so that's fairly new for us. But even with, I would say, a healthy but non-overwhelming volume of submissions on Submittable, our acceptance rate ultimately is quite low because, literary quality is what we prize first and foremost. And even though it's always tricky because so many writers are submitting these essays like for our column. Maybe they wrote it for us in mind with
Mm.
us in mind or
Yeah.
adapted it for us. So they are more tailored. But ultimately, for the literary quality to be there is what we care
Mhm.
about most. So
Mhm.
we do end up being pretty choosy
Mhm.
with what we get from Submittable and also with what we solicit. It happens all the time that we solicit pieces from more seasoned writers that just don't end up quite being a fit.
Mhm.
So it would be also useful to say we only publish 2 essays per month,
Mhm.
which brings me back to this idea of us being more of a almost, like highly curated kind of monthly, bi-weekly, I should say, essay delivered to your inbox, as opposed to a place where you log online every day and there's like 5 new pieces.
Right.
So that does allow us to kind of be very intentional with the essays we accept. And we do have a pretty extensive editorial process
Mhm.
for each piece. I mean, depending on what they need, but we are able to take the time to really dive deep
Mhm.
into the piece with a writer. And that's one of the best parts of my job is because we work so deeply with writers. A lot of them have now become, cherished colleagues and even friends.
Oh, that's
Because
great.
working on a personal piece, you just kind of you bond in a certain
Sure.
way through
Sure.
the process.
Yeah, and that actually sort of relates to a question here. I'm curious to know what the editorial process is. How much do editors seek fully fleshed out pieces versus the team's interest in working to hone the pieces to fit the publication vision?
Yes, I see that question in the chat, and that's a great question. I will say the short answer is when you submit to us, we do look for the most polished and revised version you are able to send us at the time. It's not like because we have a long and intensive editorial process that anything that's like really early stages,
Mm,
will still fly by us. I mean, I myself I am a writer, so I have experienced this many a time. It's kind of the spirit is you bring the piece to the last stretch that you can see yourself
mm,
working on, and then be open to reopening the revision doors and kind of pushing it further and to another level. But we don't accept pitches also for this reason. We're not necessarily looking to kind of shape a kernel of an idea or a very, very early draft.
mm,
Um, but we will, so in terms of the revision process, I would say it's pretty standard in the sense that I will so personally every editor works differently. What I will do is say there's an essay that's it's mature enough, like it's thought through, but there's still some significant work to do. I think I can help the writer bring it to the next level. I will give it a very careful read and write an initial developmental edit feedback letter. So kind of focusing on the more big picture themes, like are there threads or arcs in here that remain kind of buried or could be brought out more or more highlighted? Is a structure working? Kind of, are there questions I have, things I see that I might invite the writer to expand on? So that's what I call more developmental edits. Usually I will mark up the Word document itself, and leave some comments like this is a place where you might want to explore developing this theme,
mm,
or what about trying this for the ending? And then swap drafts with a writer maybe for um, a couple rounds, and then usually we move towards more sentence level edits,
mm,
copy edits slash top edits. And this process, I would say, usually takes, depending on how squeezed or ample the timeline is, a few weeks.
mm.
And sometimes I have been in correspondence with writers for sometimes years. Like in some cases, it's taken maybe not
Wow.
not for the actual edit process,
Right,
but like I will solicit someone. They might say, "Oh, I have an idea, but I don't know." Then like 8 months later, they send me a
right.
draft, and I write back a note, and then they like sit on it for a while, and then 4 months later, they send me a draft. So sometimes it can take a long time to marinate. But
Mm,
yeah, the edit process itself, I just described it. It's pretty time and labor intensive
hmm.
for everyone involved, depending on the piece. I mean, some pieces come to us, they just need a few changes and they are
Mhm.
just already so fine-tuned that they're almost ready to go. But I think it's what makes off assignment special in many
Mhm.
ways. I would say writers have had overwhelmingly positive responses to this
Mhm.
editorial process, and they feel like the piece is really taken care of.
Mhm.
And we work with their vision, but we also help push the piece towards a better version of
Mhm.
what it can be.
Sure. Question here, what are some common reasons you turn down submissions?
I would say, I mean, the most common reason is if the quality of the writing just isn't quite there for us. And this can be very tricky when a story is just really, really good in terms of its contents.
Mhm.
But maybe the writing just isn't necessarily at the literary quality that we want. I think about this a lot as a literary magazine editor. It's not like everything needs to be like linguistic pyrotechnics and Pulitzer winning maximalist prose. I think at the minimum, just a clearly, elegantly, compellingly told story is what we're looking for. But we want to be a place where readers can come to. I do this all the time as a writer. There's particularly literary magazines like Granta or the Paris Review. I go there because I know I can find pieces that have a certain, literary flair that's
Mhm.
what I'm looking for inspiration. And I think we want off assignment to be not just kind of a travel tale repository. We want it to be a place where people come and they can expect a certain literary quality to the essays. So I would say that's the most common reason. A lot of the time, it's also because the piece maybe is about an anecdote that could be told in you know, two paragraphs,
Mhm.
but it's not quite the way it's stretched into an essay doesn't really hold,
Mhm.
you know, water. Some of our editors describe this as, we'll get a lot of travel stories that might be truly a really great anecdote you tell a friend at a bar. Like, this
Mhm.
thing happened to me on my travels, but does it warrant a, 1,000 word personal essay? Is there the depth and kind of thought-provoking quality there that
Mhm.
warrants a whole essay? Sometimes a lot of the essays don't quite get there. And then this is not necessarily a most common reason, but we are really aware of travel writing and its history and its cliches and many tropes.
Mhm.
And we do try to quite actively represent a kind of travel writing to those categories. So, if we get, and again, we do get a lot of travel writing submissions, even though we're not necessarily just that. But, if we get stories that are just kind of insensitive or rely on cliches and stereotypes
Mhm.
when writing about a particular travel experience, or just don't offer anything particularly nuance or new about place writing or journeys, that might be a reason why we turn it down because we want to more actively be um, a place where you find travel writing and place writing in the form of personal essays that feels more sensitive, more nuanced, or upends the idea of who gets to travel where and who do we hear from.
Mhm.
So, for example, recently we published a letter to a stranger that's by an Ethiopian writer at the Addis airport, addressed to a migrant worker who's leaving from Ethiopia to the Middle East. And it's kind of personal, it's kind of travel oriented, but it's not traditionally in the
Mhm.
Western canon, the kind of
Mhm.
experiences of travel you might hear about. So um, we do actively look for pieces that bring something new to kind of contrast with the
Mhm.
legacy of
Mhm.
traditional travel writing.
Sure. Can you talk more about how you envision the personal essay form and just sort of clarify what you're looking for and what you're not looking for? Because I've seen personal essays that include reportage, and
Yeah.
they sort of like go into facts and they go into like the history of a place. And that can be very interesting. And then you also mentioned anecdotes, which I think that's an important distinction between like just relating
Yeah.
something cool or weird or funny that happened versus sort of extracting
Yeah.
some meaning and depth from it. So how do you sort of think about the personal essay and what, maybe even if you want to talk about a few pieces that you published and why those were really right for the magazine?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think we are maybe somewhere along the middle of the spectrum between, let's say on one end you have um, deeply reported long form features about a place for, I don't know, like Outside Magazine or National Geographic
Mm,
or one of these more
mhm,
really kind of reportage oriented long form writing where maybe there is a first person, but the personal journey is really not the focus. So
mm,
almost what Pico Iyer when he did his class visit was originally supposed to talk about. It's that kind of piece where maybe it's more about the place, it's more about reporting, it's less about a personal story or narrative behind the piece. But on the other hand, as I was saying, we're not just looking for good stories or travel anecdotes for the sake of themselves and, don't care about the kind of literary quality around it. So we're somewhere in the middle in the sense that we want it to be a place where literary essay writing meets personal narrative,
mhm,
meets some element of place or discovery. And but maybe the personal narrative is the most important factor here. Most of our essays do contain some deep kind of personal insight or emotional experience that the writer had. Like first and foremost, they are first person essays where the writer is uncovering something about themselves or their own emotions through these other parameters
mhm,
of our prompt. So, a recent example from the no equivalent column actually is about the word yar in Hindi and Marathi. And the writer writes about how at first she had no idea how to use that word and then found that it was actually quite translatable. It means friend
mm,
in Marathi. Then she then kind of explores how as an adult moving to India with children and her husband and navigating the world of what is friendship? What are new friendships in midlife? What counts as a close friend? How
mm,
does friendship slate into the hierarchy of how she relates with, different people she encounters in Indian society and in her circles? She then explores through her personal lens how she navigates the definition of friendship, how, this was unlocked by that one word. Um, and then another piece we published recently was actually the inaugural piece for the Goodbye to That Place column, um, called To the Home Lost in the Palisades Fire. And it's
mm,
by Leslie Jamieson, and it's a short essay um, about saying goodbye to this childhood home
mm,
that burned down in the fires in LA. And she kind of leapfrogs through childhood memories, teenage memories. It's like a list style essay about the many details that hold significance in her memory for this place. So I think you'll see the common thread is that they are, at the end of the day, deeply, deeply personal. Like there needs to be a powerful personal story
mhm.
anchoring the
Yeah.
essay. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your
No,
question, but
absolutely. And I think it also helps. It's interesting what you said about the personal journey because it's also the writer is sort of going to be arriving at a different place by the end of the
yeah,
essay where they began.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
interesting. So
yeah.
there's some
That
like maybe some element of growth or evolution or
mhm.
change for it to be a successful essay.
Yes, yes. That's a great way to put it. I think there usually is some, like many good personal essays, there is a process of kind of wrestling with something, uncovering something, processing something that is happening within the pages. And yeah, I was gonna say something, but I lost my train of thought, so we can move
Yeah,
on
yeah,
to the
yeah,
next
yeah. That
question.
makes sense. What are you seeing a lot of in submissions? Like, is there anything you can tell writers like, it's great to write about trees, but just keep in mind that we see about
Yeah,
800 submissions per day that have to do with trees.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's actually I have some pretty funny answers for that.
Mhm.
Hostile love stories for
Oh,
some reason.
really?
We
Not hostile.
less
You mean like youth hostel, not hostile
use
as
hostile.
in
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. Also, but also hostile, like
hostility in
as
the hostel.
ended badly love stories. We certainly have some of those too. But I think especially in the early days of off assignment, I would say those petered out these days. But there was an era of Roads and Kingdom magazine and this kind of Anthony Bourdain like
Mm,
gritty backpack travel writing and literature, which I think actually now has kind of waned a bit, but we got a lot of, yeah, like backpacking stories, youth hostel, Southeast Asia stories that I
mm,
would say fit in my category of, is this really bringing something that new to personal essays or travel writing? And
mm,
oftentimes they weren't really, although we do have some essays in our archives that are about um, you know, tubing in Laos or full moon parties in Thailand that are actually some of our most amazing essays because some incredible personal narrative is kind of,
mm,
behind that premise. Something else on a more serious note that we get a lot of, especially for the letter to a stranger column, and that I've always wrestled with as an editor, is writing about striking strangers who are less fortunate
mm,
than the writer. Or usually it will be something like, I encountered this person living in poverty in this place I visited. I encountered someone who, was a beggar or needed help in this way or was down on their luck in this way. And it made me realize
mm,
how much privilege I had. We get a lot of those essays. And I think personally, it's real that sometimes when we travel, some of the most striking strangers
mm,
we meet are people who we have a lot of empathy for, or their circumstances are shocking in some ways, or, it makes a traveler realize their comparative position.
mm,
We get a lot of essays about that. I think that the tricky thing is oftentimes there's not much to those essays besides, oh, I realize how fortunate I was,
mm,
or how privileged I was, or I wish I could help this
mm,
person more. Um, and usually we turn those essays down just because there really isn't much more to say than that, and it just doesn't feel like there's necessarily enough depth to the piece
mhm.
besides saying privilege
Yeah.
exists. The one piece that kind of broke through is a piece we published last fall. I think the title was to the servant boy or something along those lines, and it's about a writer who is British Pakistani visiting his home in Pakistan as a child, and there is to the servant girl, I think, and there is a girl who's working as a kind of domestic helper
Mm,
at their house, and it's kind of about the childhood bond and friendship they developed, but how it was intensified and complicated by the fact that she had to literally serve him.
mhm,
But then they also were childhood playmates. And I think that is one piece that it just dove into that story with enough nuance and reflection and depth that it broke out of the mold of a
Mhm.
story of, encountering someone
Yeah.
less fortunate.
So
Yeah.
the person, just to go back to that, the person doesn't necessarily need to be like a stranger, like someone you don't know at all. It could be someone you maybe never had a chance to express certain feelings to.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Over the years, I mean, I think we've published hundreds and hundreds of letters to a stranger. So it's been really fun seeing people's more creative takes on who the stranger is. Like it could be, I think it could be someone who actually defies the definition of a stranger, as you say. Like maybe there's something about them that has been made strange
Mhm.
or estranged.
Hmm.
Um, we have also some fun, really unexpected ones. Like a few years ago, the travel writer Sebastian Modak, he used to write the 52 Places pieces for the New York Times. He wrote a letter to a stranger addressed to a dog called My Siberian Hiking Companion that was about this kind of stray or masterless dog that followed him around Siberia for a day and was
Yeah.
kind of this like mysterious companion. We have a letter to a stranger that's addressed to, it's by a writer addressed to her own body. And, after going through some severe physical illnesses and challenges, her body had become estranged
Wow,
from
that's
her.
really cool.
And it was kind of about, yeah, it was about the process of kind of getting reacquainted
Hmm.
with her body who had become a stranger. So I think, it's actually, as an editor, I love it when pieces
Yeah.
get really creative, or it feels like there's something kind of really intriguing to say about what estrangement means. And
Yeah.
besides just
Yeah.
being a literal stranger, yeah, it's like what are the ways in which certain things, certain beings, certain versions of ourselves or people become
So
strangers
could
and kind of
could someone submit a piece like a letter to my husband, like say someone feels estranged from their husband or their best friend or someone that they thought that they knew very well. Would that sort of qualify as a stranger if they've become estranged in some way? Or
I
maybe it
think I
depends
think
how it's
so.
done. Yeah.
I think it depends how it's done. It's definitely
Mhm.
not something, I mean, I don't think I would like outright disqualify anything just based on the metric of
Mhm.
actual strangerness or not. I think it depends on how it's done and whether there's, it still needs to be differentiated from just like a letter to whoever.
Right.
But I think as long as there's an element of like estrangement, something has or someone has become unknown. Is there a kind of haunting or staying power there? What are you restless? And I
Right.
love that we're having this conversation too, because it highlights how, we talk so much about travel writing and place writing, but fundamentally it doesn't have to be that. What truly interests me and interests us is just kind of wrestling with human emotions and
Uh-huh.
psychology. So a
Right.
piece we have had letters to a stranger that are just sat at home or in your hometown or in just
Hmm.
your, regular living place. So they're not
Hmm.
really so much about place or journeys, but it's more the personal journey. The wrestling was
Right.
a strength for human relationships.
Right. My fiction writer brain is firing, and I'm thinking of all these ideas. Like if you discover an identity to somebody that you never, let's say you discover that your parent was secretly a spy or something like that. Like that's a form
Yeah,
of them being a stranger. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know if that would sort of work or fit into the category, but it's just
yeah.
kind of fun to think about.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned that because a few years ago we published a letter to a stranger called To the Spy I Was Named After, and it's
Oh,
a
well,
writer
there you go.
who discovers her uncle most likely was a spy operating in Latin America and retired to this island in South Carolina where apparently all retired, not all, but many retired spies just kind of congregate and hang out. And she's wrestling with that
Yeah.
family history and legacy about a family member who she otherwise just knew as her
Mhm.
uncle. So
Mhm. That's
they're
amazing.
actually, yeah, it's a great story out there. And I think
Yeah.
she's writing a spy novel based on that
Oh, that's
letter to a
great.
stranger.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Um,
Yeah. It's interesting too what you say about like a lot of people send in work where they're encountering a stranger who's in a less fortunate position, and then the piece is sort of about like their hand wringing over their own privilege. And it sounds like what you're saying is that it like that's a reasonable response, but the piece needs to kind of go deeper than that. So it doesn't,
Yeah.
I'm guessing from what you're saying that the submissions that you see sort of end there, like, and then I realized, I needed to appreciate my position or something like that. But what you're looking for is something that sort of really mines that feeling for something more
Yeah.
personal, maybe more idiosyncratic, more special and surprising.
Yes, that's a great, I
Mm.
mean, I will put that in our submission guidelines because that's a great
Yeah, like
encapsulation of
it
it.
shouldn't just end on the, and then I
Yeah.
realized kind of note, but it has to kind of unpack it a little bit more.
Yes, yes. I think, adjectives that we always reiterate in submission guidelines or the feedback I give writers, two words that come up again and again are depth and also for the essay to be thought-provoking. Like,
Mm.
no matter how wide-ranging or constrained the actual actions or journeys of the story is, I think we do look for essays you read and they feel like a gut punch or hard hitting or thought provoking in some ways that this isn't just a story of someone who experienced something when traveling, that this really unlocked
Hmm.
something kind of deeply psychologically or emotionally compelling or intriguing.
Yeah. And you've mentioned literary quality a lot, and I'm wondering, do you also look for kind of like accessibility and like how do you balance I'm guessing you don't take pieces that are particularly experimental in certain ways or that are kind of more difficult to access, or how do you sort of,
Yeah,
I'm sort of wondering about the balance between like, literary quality and also like accessibility as and readability.
yeah. Yeah, that's a really great question because we do, I mean, I would say most pieces we publish um are fairly accessible. They're well told, but even though we're looking for literary quality, it's not like we don't want pieces where the language is obfuscating the
Mhm.
actual
Mhm.
story being told, or it's just, a writer showing off,
Mhm.
that they can, riff off a David Foster Wallace style piece, or,
Yeah.
or, or like we don't necessarily um, gravitate towards that. I think we have published some pieces that might feel more dense or experimental, or maybe the writer's style is just a little bit less accessible.
Mhm.
Um, those are more rare, and I think we do notice that those pieces maybe do tend to have more of a challenge finding readers or getting clicks. We're not a literary magazine that's all about clicks, but we do track, like what
Mhm.
pieces are readers spending most time on, responding to most. And we do notice that stories that come across clearly that are accessible generally tend to do well. So I would say most of our stories, they need to be well written enough, but
Mhm.
also accessible. Like we're not an experimental lit mag that will welcome kind of nebulous abstract experiments for the sake of that. I think um the clear, powerful story told in a way that's um it's hard when I say like literary enough. I don't really like I think that's so subjective, right? Like
Mhm.
everyone here or everyone listening probably has different definitions of what literary means. For us, with our editorial team, it's not like we have a particular set of rigid guidelines that's
Mhm.
like this is the bullet point list of literary qualities we're looking for in the standards. I think it's up to every individual editor. And something we do is, if I'm reading a piece where maybe I'm kind of on the fence, like, is this accessible enough? Is this literary enough? Is a story kind of hitting right? And I'm not so sure because maybe I think it's not for my subjective taste, but someone else could really respond to it. We do a lot of sharing and discussing within our
Mm.
own editorial team, which represents, like a more diverse range of opinions and ages and backgrounds that than just me, and see what other editors respond to. And sometimes I will happily accept a piece that I maybe initially wasn't so drawn to it, but other people on our team really, really responded to. But
Mhm.
I think that's all to say, at the end of the day, something like literary quality is, unless you have extreme outliers, like this is
Right.
really poorly written, this is so abstract and
Yeah,
experimental, it's basically illegible. There is a kind of murky middle that is
right.
just highly subjective. And I think it's probably forever uh, a puzzle that lit Macs face, is how to create a fair process
Mhm.
that at the end of the day is still going to be subjective, but can
Mhm.
kind of appraise these abstract qualities in the piece.
Sure, that's interesting. Okay, we have a question here. As a writer, what are some of the practices you incorporate as you travel and write, keeping in mind some of the experiences you have as an editor working in this genre?
Mm. Emma, that is such a good question. That's kind of like a existential, philosophical question I wrestle with all the time. I will speak as a writer myself, not necessarily as an editor of OA, although the two are, of course, interconnected. I do a fair amount of traveling and writing about my experiences, and I play around with both fiction and nonfiction, but something I've discovered for myself, what works for me is I don't I don't really pitch magazines or go on trips having kind of pitch an idea, and then look for something and kind of execute that quest when I travel. That's just not really the kind of writer I am. And sometimes I find that when I go to a new location with kind of a piece already in mind, or I've decided, oh, I'm going to go, to this country and write this kind of a story, it can get very kind of existentially murky. Like, how am I just kind of performing something or play acting something? So what I like to do is the opposite. I like to show up in places and just absorb and take notes. Take a lot of notes, observe a lot, but I always have the philosophy, if I end up living through some experiences that stay with me and end up being good for essays, then I will write about them. And it's
Mhm.
also completely okay for me to experience this place and at the end of the day say, maybe I have a lot of good notes, I have a good set of journal entries. I maybe have some good travel stories to tell my friends, but maybe there's not something here that needs to be urgently shared with the world in the form of a personal essay. So, but I think, taking notes and writing down what you did is a good way to ensure against the possibility that maybe 10 years later something will unlock and you're like, wait, that was a story
Mhm.
that came from that trip, but wait, actually I have no notes and only very vague memories. So, but if that makes sense, I try to avoid the trap of, in the end, writing the kind of essays that's like making a lot of foam out of not
Mhm.
much, because I came to a place, I promised myself I would write such a story,
Mhm.
and then interesting things or thought-provoking things or profound experience didn't really happen, but I'm just trying to stretch something out of it. Um, I try to avoid that and let time. Usually I would write something 2 or 3 months later after a certain trip or a certain experience, when I have the perspective to see, okay, was everything that felt new and shiny and exciting during that trip, was it just more of an anecdote, or is it actually staying with me in the way that I
Mhm.
feel like I have something to share
Mhm.
in essay form? Um, and usually having a few weeks or a few months to kind of gain that perspective from the experience
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
helpful.
This is so interesting. I'm wondering also how you would define travel, because I'm thinking also like there is that if you are interested in writing a travel essay, there is sort of a pressure. Oh, I've been to Sicily and now I'm going to write about
Yeah.
Sicily and it was so exotic and it was so exciting. But
Yeah.
maybe, the trip to the grocery store in a neighborhood you've never been in actually yields
Yeah.
more fruit.
Yeah.
So how would you sort of define travel writing, and how, could somebody write an essay that is something very big now, like a trip
Yeah.
to a soccer field that was actually like blew
Yeah.
their mind for some reason.
Yeah. I'm actually a huge fan of the latter, like the kind of travel or movement or visits that are actually about somewhere very close to home or somewhere
Mm,
very familiar or somewhere very unexpected. I actually think that when we get those submissions and those pieces, oftentimes there's so much more to say about
mm,
that grocery store in a different
mm.
neighborhood. If the
Right.
writer is going to write about it, it's because there's something um, actually like interesting or mysterious or
Mhm.
story worthy there about their personal relation to it. I think an easy trap of writing about, going to Sicily or going to this like very kind of traditional like travel destination, travel adventure setting is we get so overwhelmed in kind of writing down all these new details and the newness of the experience and all the descriptions that the newness and the descriptions end up being the content, but there really isn't
Mm,
so much to say beneath it besides, I went to Sicily and this is what the coastline looked like, and these are all the delicious foods we had on the plaza, and this is what I noticed about this village fair I went to. There's this and I think there is a form of travel writing that is about that kind of like frantic energy of just being in a new place and being immersed in so many details and just kind of recreating that atmosphere. I think that's like a subgenre of travel writing that is delightful in many ways in and of itself. Um, but I do think personally, and for off assignment, because we're more about that like deeper, slower dive into some kind of personal narrative, oftentimes it's the essays that don't fall into that frantic energy of just newness and description and actually explore something um pretty like a pretty local, pretty unexpected. Our forthcoming piece for the Goodbye to That Place column. I think I can talk about it. It's not a classified secret, but it's coming out next month. It's actually about a neighborhood grocery store and the writers.
Very psychic for
That
this
you're
segment.
so prescient. You keep on bringing up examples that actually exist or are about to come up. But it is about the writer's relationship to her neighborhood grocery store and the utopia it represents, but
Mhm,
the tensions within.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so I'm a fan. Like one of the pieces I personally wrote as a writer that I still kind of stand by and like most is just walking around um Cambridge and Somerville and Boston
mhm,
during the pandemic. I went on these
mhm,
like absolutely irrationally long walks
mhm,
because I was stuck walking in circles around my home neighborhood,
mhm,
which is in some ways it's like yeah, travel but very close to home, and it
mhm.
ends up being one of my favorite pieces that I wrote. So I think you really, and even sometimes we just publish straight up personal essays that don't even have that much of a sense of place. Like it can be a letter to a stranger that's
Mhm.
just about the personal journey. So journey can really take on so many forms
Yeah,
in our
yeah.
context.
So if there's somebody, excuse me, who's hearing this and they're thinking this is amazing, I want to get involved, I want to join their editorial staff, I want to read for this magazine, do you have any opportunities like that?
We are we're a pretty small team, so we don't have readers for the magazine because we do get, as I said, kind of a healthy amount of submissions, but not such a large amount that we have external readers. We do have new positions that open up maybe on a yearly basis. Some summers we'll do. We always appreciate summer internship opportunities that if if someone is in journalism school or a university program that can help fund the internship, because we really believe in paid work and not just volunteer work. But unfortunately, it's not been every year that we're able to just budget a summer internship fund. But students and writers have come to us in the past saying, "Hey, I'm really, really interested in, being a reader, doing a summer internship for the magazine to see what it's like to work there. My MFA program or my writing program or my school allows me to, if I do get this position, they will fund it." So we've had a couple interns in the past years who
Mm,
kind of came in. Um, we also are really growing our educational programming. So we've
mm,
started offering online courses like writing and craft courses in the past year. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there maybe to look out for maybe future job posts or hiring because we're fast growing in that area, but that kind of requires a different
mm,
skill set from traditional editorial. But yeah, I would say we're always, my inbox is always open. I actually started out as a volunteer reader back in 2020,
mm,
a volunteer editor, I should say, and within 2 months, the team was like, whatever we can budget to pay you something, we
mm.
will. Like we really
Great.
believe in paying our staff. And then I went from there and I just got more and more involved. But it
Mhm,
started with me emailing the magazine staff, just saying, I really want to be a part of this
mm,
one way or another. Is there an opportunity for me?
mhm.
And, they were really receptive. So
That's
I think I
great.
would definitely like to
Mhm,
to pay it forward. But yes, I mean, not to get into the finances of it, but we are not university backed or
mhm,
institution backed. So we're entirely a nonprofit literary magazine. So unfortunately, I wish we had an annual budget to bring in paid interns, but it's good to talk about it. That's something
mhm.
to keep in mind and to bring back. Um, but yeah, submissions are free, and we are also looking to do free in-person events
Mhm,
in the cities where our staff is at. We really started this era of off assignment and the team during the pandemic. So we all worked online. We met as a staff online, and in recent years we started doing more in-person events,
mhm,
mainly in New York, some in London. And it's just been really lovely to bring back this. Originally, OA was like a reading series in the salon as well,
mhm.
and could kind of invite readers in to just meet up in person. So
Yeah.
we also hope to bring that back and kind of get more of a community going that way.
That was actually my next question, which is, do you have a sense of the readership? Do you hear back from readers responding to particular pieces? If somebody is eager to submit, can you give them a sense of the likelihood of how many people might be seeing their work?
Yeah, so the readership, um, we have a newsletter that is sent out to a free newsletter is sent out to subscribers, that goes out to 5,000 plus kind of regular monthly subscribers. Um, you know, tens of thousands of website visits, um, on a monthly basis across our many pages. So there is a healthy readership, mostly people who find us online or through social media. There's a strong, I mean, now that's actually a question I have for everyone. Now that Twitter is no longer Twitter, and I don't know what's happening with X or Blue Sky or
Mhm,
Threads, Instagram has become a place where we focus our efforts to kind of cultivate
mhm,
more social media sharing and updates for our magazine. But it's been a challenge being like, I keep on asking this question, where is a literary town
mhm,
square these days?
mhm,
I think there's less of a place to kind of disseminate pieces and find readers. But Instagram is a place where we are submittable. People can always find us on there. The submissions are open year round. In terms of how many people read the piece, it's always at minimum two. At the very minimum, two editors will be reading and voting on a piece.
Mhm.
And then I would say if it kind of advances to um, a later stage of, maybe we're on the fence or we want more input, we will often share it with a whole team to kind of solicit what I mentioned before, kind of um, solicit feedback from different perspectives. And so that in that case, it might be seen by up to five or six readers.
Mhm.
And we do our very best to get back to people within 2 months
Mhm.
on
Great.
Submittable. Um, yes, I wish it could be much sooner, but the reality is we have a really small staff working part-time. So 2 months is kind of the deadline we give ourselves. And then yeah, once you hear back, usually the piece will be slated for publication, I would say maybe 2 or 3 or more months
Mhm.
out, maybe between 2 to 4 months out from the acceptance date. And then we'll start the editorial process and, usually try to keep it to a healthy momentum, wrap it up around um, a month from when it begins and just have the piece ready. And oh, something else we do that I haven't mentioned is for every piece we publish, we have a little behind the essay interview
Mhm.
with a writer kind of talking about their work, their process, the projects they are working
Mhm.
on, to kind of just give the writer a space to
Mhm.
talk about their writing life and self beyond just the piece. And that interview goes out with the essay to our 5,000 plus
Mhm.
subscribers. Every time an essay is published, and we promote it on social media, and it's always linked to the essay. And I should say something else we do because we only publish twice a month is we give really, really robust promotion and support
Mhm.
to the writer and their piece. And we stay in their orbit. And if the writer publishes other essays or, a book or does something else, we'll often share it in our social media and it's a heartwarming community. Like writers have gotten literary agents from their off assignment essays
Oh, that's
and
great.
go on to write and sell books, and we'll be really excited about that and just continue. I think we really believe in continuing to support our writer's career
Mhm.
beyond, the one kind of publication experience they've had with us. So that's been a really lovely thing to be a part of.
That's great. So one final question, and thank you so much. This has been so interesting. So this is a question I have for all editors, which is we know burnout can be a problem. You're reading through hundreds of submissions, sometimes maybe repetitive. What keeps you motivated? What keeps you excited? We know you have other things going on, family obligations, teaching, writing, whatever. So what keeps you especially inspired to do this work?
Wonderful question. And I just see Judy's message. Thank you, Judy,
She's
for
a
being a
big fan.
away here. Um, I think, an answer immediately came to mind. It's the thrill of discovering something great. Like there's nothing as rewarding as finding a piece on Submittable or in your inbox as an editor that you're just blown away and it just knocks the wind out of you and you're like, yes, I cannot believe, you know, this has come my way or that I have found this. This is absolutely something we will publish. And how lucky that it has been sent to us. So I think it's the thrill of discovering that. I think also something I do as an editor is if I love an essay I read somewhere or a book I read somewhere, now I get to write fan mail to that writer being like, "Hi, I'm the editor-in-chief at Off Assignment," and we would love to publish, a piece if you have a letter to a stranger or something else in mind. And, sometimes it pans out and it's like, whoa, I'm actually a super fan of this novel, and now I get to edit a brand new essay this writer has written for us. But, even when it's something that comes to us, actually, that's kind of the most lovely is when it's unexpected and you are discovering a new essay
Mm,
and a new writer. Um, yeah, I think that the thrill of just curating really, really good work is
mhm.
it makes everything else worth it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming out.